Hobbes believed state of nature is intolerable. Every man against every man. There is no peace. It is war. Because of which the people will surrender themselves to an authority, to a central authority. Okay. They will give their right and they will make that central authority powerful. Okay. Hobbes says it is not between a man and a central authority, but among themselves, between men among men, to surrender their rights to central authority. In return for peace. Okay. So this agreement is called social contract. Okay. This is based on consent of the governed. So Hobbes proposed, based on the consent of the governed, central authority is given these powers. Central authority has no divine right to rule. King has no divine right. He is only a result of contract. So that's what he said. Okay. Let us look at this. This is the theory of sovereignty. Everyone says to every other man that I authorize and give up my right of governing myself to this man or the assembly of men. It is not necessary that central authority should be a person or a king. It can even be assembly. So Hobbes is not talking about the form of government. It is not about the form of government. On this condition that you give up your right to him and authorize all his actions in like manner, and he is called sovereign. Okay. To that sovereign, it is said, all powers are given. The cover page of Leviathan shows this all-powerful sovereign is a king. Is a king who is holding a knife, and then he is also holding church, power of the church. Church is under him. Okay. And this sovereign is made of people only. So these are all people. They're all people. So Hobbes thought This kind of concentration of power is required to bring peace. So he thought of giving so much of power. People must confer. So Hobbes said, people must confer. All their power and strength upon one man or upon one assembly of men, that may reduce all their wills unto one will. Reduce all their wills into one will. Okay. Some were claiming that church should have final authority, but Hobbes rejected. And Protestant Puritans were saying that individual conscience is the final authority, but Hobbes rejected. Okay, because he believes that order is not possible without application of force, without the application of force. So he said, law is a command. Covenants without the sword are but words and of no strength to secure a man at all. Okay, so Hobbes thought of putting everything into into one person or one assembly. Okay, and this places certain obligations on the sovereignty. So this is the obligation, he said. This is the obligation of the sovereign. The office of the sovereign consists in the end for which he was trusted with sovereign power, namely the procuration of the safety of the people. And by safety here is not meant a bare preservation, but also all other contentments of life, which every man by lawful industry, without danger or hurt to the commonwealth, shall acquire to himself. So this is the obligation of the sovereign, to take care of the people. And subjects have an obligation. The obligation of the subjects to the sovereign is understood to last as long and no longer than the power lost by which he is able to protect them. Okay. So the obligation of the sovereign is to provide safety and other things. And the obligation of the subjects is to give that power to the authority as long as the sovereign is doing this protection and other things. Okay. So Hobbes went for concentration of powers in central authority. Okay. But his book Leviathan also shows that people have certain powers and they don't have to give to the central authority. So this is what he said. For example, people should have the liberty to buy and sell and otherwise contract with one another, to choose their abode, their own diet, and their own trade of life, and institute their children as they themselves think fit, and the like. So people should have the liberty to do these things, and sovereign need not interfere. So this is a concept of negative state. So you can say he contributed to founding of liberal theory of the negative state. So it is something like this. Locke would elaborate and give a full-fledged idea of the negative state. And which would finally create liberal democracy. And we know that liberal democracy has a separation of powers, but Hobbes rejects the separation of powers. For example, separation of powers between the legislature and executive. He says this: if there had not first been an opinion received of the greatest part of England, and these powers were divided between the king and the lords and the House of Commons, the people had never been divided and fallen into the civil war. Okay, he says that if there was no division between the parliament and the sovereign, the civil war would not have happened. So one of the foundations of liberal democracy, that is division of powers, Hobbes rejects. So Hobbes' model went for concentration of powers, lack of division of powers, or you can say this separation of powers, and the model contributes to an absolutist state. Okay,